Welcome to our new podcast, Core Combatives Podcast, an RMA experience. We will go over all of that so you understand what is RMA. I am here with our co-host, Shihan Walt Lysak, and he will introduce himself. So Core Combatives Podcast is a podcast that is coming from the Fighting Podcast. I decided to change the name, bring better topics for everybody related to combative self-defense, the RMA system, martial arts in general, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We're going to interview a lot of different people. We will talk a lot about strategy, mindset, principles. I think will be a great podcast for you to add to the list of things you listen or watch to. And you could right away hit the subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast from. Hit the like button, please, and send your comments to us wherever you're getting this, especially YouTube. Write your comments. Tell us what would you like us to talk about. And just to go right into it, Shihan Walt Lysak, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Walt Lysak. My school is in West Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts, and I developed the central method of reality martial arts. But I've had a martial arts career. I've trained a lot of the top people. I'm a black belt with Professor Luigi in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been blessed to train with not only my father, Walt Lysak Sr., who's a well-known and by many people's opinion considered a pioneer in reality martial arts. I'm an 8th degree black belt with Joe Louis, and a board member of the Joe Louis Fighting Systems, is a famous world heavyweight kickboxing champion, also a black belt under Bill Superfoot Wallace. I've done numerous other martial arts throughout my life, and basically a lifelong martial arts, lifelong grappler, and reality martial arts and the preparedness side of things is really my specialty. What I focus on. It's like kind of the who I am. I always tell people Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is like my golf if I'm a doctor. It's my favorite martial art, my favorite thing to do. I love it. And but reality martial arts I know is what takes everything to the highest level because you can't really go any further. I tell people that you can kind of think of RME as everything you see in MMA that's effective and works, and everything you don't see in MMA that's effective and works. In other words, it's really unlimited. So if you're allowed to do it in MMA, you're allowed to do it in RMA. And if you're not allowed to do it in MMA, you're allowed to do it in RMA. That would really be the difference. So the difference as far as effectiveness would come down to, at that point just to the individual, but it's as far as you can possibly take martial arts, and it goes beyond just the physical, just beyond the punching and the kicking and the grappling, but it also deals with every aspect of preparedness that we consider our entire life. How can we be prepared and make ourselves as safe as humanly possible for any type of situation that we could deal with, and not only physically and not as far as fighting is concerned, but legally, every possible way. So we practice in how to verbally diffuse and de-escalate confrontation, how to prevent conflict, all the different aspects, which we'll get into more detail when we get into the principles aspect. But it blends in perfectly as well with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. One of the things I tell people is you have a lot of people out there, and you'll hear people that call themselves reality martial arts or they're personal protection guys, and they'll sometimes even seemingly put down Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Without a doubt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one of the most important foundational fighting systems or martial arts that you can practice as a reality martial artist. Are there more things that we can add to it? Of course. But the truth is the origin of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the way they practiced it originally was totally focused on reality in the street. They've, for the purpose of making it a little bit more popular and spreading it, of course, then they had to go to Vale Tudo, which is still less realistic than the street. And then eventually they came up with the sport jiu-jitsu type training, which just makes sense because it's an easy way to learn your foundational skills of position and control, transition and submission, and how to counter those things, all the elements of grappling. So it was necessary to do that, but you can always build a strong RMA foundation on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu simply because when they originally developed it, that was the purpose. The purpose was for reality, for self-defense, for the real world, not for the mats and not for a cage or not even for a ring. And some people will say that traditional martial artists are think inside the box. And I tell people, I go, look, although I'm a huge fan of MMA, I was actually sat cage side at UFC 1. I was in the corner of Maurice Smith at UFC 14 when he won the World Heavyweight Championship. I love MMA. I'm a huge fan of MMA, but it's still not as real as it can get. It's not as real as it's very real. But when you talk to, say, for example, a soldier who's been in the battlefield and seen his friend's head blown off in a real combat, and you're going to tell me the UFC is as real as it gets, how is that the case? So when you look at self-defense, when you look at a real street situation, so for example, sports, they might say a traditional martial artist thinks inside the box. I'll say, yeah, and you're jumping out of the box into a cage. Either way, you're confined by walls. So what we do want to do is kind of go beyond that. Say, yes, we want to understand these effective skills that are useful in the cage. And these fighters are absolutely, MMA fighters, professional fighters, and competitive jiu-jitsu fighters are just phenomenal athletes. They train all the time, every day of the week, hours and hours and hours. So we have to give them a huge amount of respect. However, we can take martial arts to another level. And one simple little analogy I like to use is this. Imagine for a moment any fighter that you like. I don't care if it's someone from sport jiu-jitsu world. I don't care if it's from someone from the MMA world, right? So picture this one fighter, for example, does jiu-jitsu. Now, in our program, we teach what we call 7 mats, 7 main arsenal tools. That includes striking, grappling, biting, eye attacks, body handles, nerve attacks, and weaponry. The environmental weaponry can be conventional weapons, means it's made to be a weapon, or an improvised weapon, means it's a makeshift weapon. So you have 7 arsenals, again, striking, grappling, biting, eye attacks, body handles, nerve attacks, and weaponry, both conventional and unconventional. So in grappling, we only have one of those arsenals. So it's 1 mat, very effective arsenal, but still 1 arsenal. And then in 7 mat, we have 7 arsenals. So imagine your favorite fighter, whoever it might be. So you're picturing that fighter now. We'll just call him Joe. Okay, so here's Joe over here. Here's the sport Joe, the 1 mat Joe. That same Joe has spent 2 years training 7 mats. So he's not only good at grappling, for example, but he's good at striking, biting, eye attacks, body handles, nerve attacks, and weaponry. They both are equally skilled in grappling, but they fight 10 times. But this Joe, RMA Joe, is allowed to use all 7 arsenals. Sport Joe is only allowed to use 1 mat, grappling. They both can grapple, but one can use all the arsenals. They fight 10 out of 10 times. Who do you think is going to win most of the time? Obviously, it's going to be the RMA Joe, simply because they have the same skills in grappling, but this guy has more options and he's skilled in more things. So that's kind of what creates that of the effectiveness. If he runs into an issue where the grappling won't work, he has other things he can go back to. Maybe it's an edge weapon, maybe it's a firearm, maybe it's biting, eye gouging, and maybe it's striking, whatever the case might be. But it gives you more options. And there's a saying we have in RMA, and that is totality promotes reality. So the more realistic something is, the less rules there are, the more it represents reality. Even if you look back at the first UFC, I sat there caged at the first UFC, and there was only 2 rules: no biting and no eye gouging. And I always tell people say, well, that's for cheaters or this, that. Well, come up with whatever excuse you want. They're still part of reality. And if they didn't make a difference, why do we take this out of an event with the toughest guys on the planet? Because everybody knows that they're dangerous and can make a difference. Now, I realize that even in the fight with Royce, Gordeau did the little cheese ball kind of bite, in that situation. But there's a time and a place to use things. There's a time when maybe biting or eye gouging could just put you in a worse position and actually cause you to get beat up more. But my point is this. Let's leave it at this as we get kind of into this whole program when we're thinking of RMA. If there's one move or one skill that means the difference between winning or losing, regardless of what it is, do you want to be without that move in a real fight? Do you want to be without that skill or that tactic in a real fight? My answer personally is no. But that's up to you if you decide to limit yourself and make yourself more vulnerable. But for me, being unlimited as a warrior is the best approach to, and it also, what it can do is help us to tip the scales. When maybe someone is a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger, you have to come up with ways to sort of tip the scales to your favor. If you're smaller, if maybe you're older, you're more beat up, you come up with ways to tip your scales, the skills in your favor. And that's a real major concept in RMA. So that gets the ball rolling for you with regards to RMA principles. But we'll get more into that as this podcast and this series continue in the future.
Yeah. So for the listener and the viewer, my background, I'm a 5th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a black belt under Shihan Walt Lysak in RMA. I have trained judo, Shotokan, boxing, sambo a little bit. But anyway, so I've been exposed to many things, and those things were isolated. And then, of course, with MMA and back the day in Brazil, the way they, like Shihan said, training was more realistic. We always, that was the first thing my first coach told me, is like, well, there are 3 jiu-jitsus, like say sports jiu-jitsu, amateur jiu-jitsu, you're wearing a uniform, and we have a set of rules and etc. Well, they used to call professional jiu-jitsu, which would be mostly the no-gi version, the submission grappling. That actually wasn't so common to see people training in. But as students progress and getting closer to brown belt and black belt, especially black belts, that's when we would really start training, say, submission, grappling, submission, wrestling, towards mostly vale tudo. Vale tudo means like everything goes. So that was before the MMA days, like, when they created the term MMA, and even before the creation of the MMA gloves,
Yep.
right? So we used to train like slapping and smacking, or just like punches to the body, marking. But anyway, and then the third one was jiu-jitsu, focused on self-defense, or applied, for your self-protection. However, just learning that jiu-jitsu, that self-defense methodology based on jiu-jitsu, I always felt like, well, there's something missing. And when I first met you, when I saw RMA for the first time, the first things that really attracted me was like you said, how comprehensive the system is, how comprehensive the approach is. And I'm not even going to talk about system, because I hope like we have people, we will talk about the system, but not only about the system, because I think everybody from any system can learn a lot from the principles, a lot from this mindset that comes from RMA. And going back, I felt back the day that for the first time I saw a system that took in consideration the spectrum in violence, meaning that it could be something that actually starts, and probably we're going to talk more about that in our reality warrior principle block. We're going to have actually 3 blocks in this podcast. It's going to be awesome. And but say the de-escalation, right? The avoidance, and how important it is to not engage if we can, to leave a potentially dangerous dangerous situation by finding ways to extract ourselves from that scenario. But if needed, it's like a dial, right? That we can dial up, go from maybe I can just restrain this person and make myself or my way out of the situation, or help other people. Maybe it's not a lethal situation, but any situation can become lethal. And I'm going to tell some stories I think is even tragic, but in a situation that wasn't lethal, that ended up causing the death of somebody, But anyway, the importance of understanding the spectrum, the importance of understanding the need to train everything, like you said, especially like things that people don't take in consideration, like eye gouging, biting, nerve attacks, to create opportunities. Because a lot of people think like we are talking about like Dr. Spock type of thing, nerve, right? I think that's a mystic, especially because there are a lot of phony instructors and phony systems where you see people just like, I'm not going to call names to not trash any system, but say somebody goes attack you and they just move your body and the person falls as if you were like doing a full judo throw, but without contact or minimum, not even using your hands, which we know that is not realistic.
Right.
And a lot of people see this stuff and think that we are talking about the same thing. No, we are not talking about the same thing. We're talking about as real as it gets, and this is like as real can like really get, more than just a slogan from the UFC, right? As real as it gets would be in MMA world, would be the pride back the day when you could stomp the head, kick the head
for competition, for sure.
For competition, as far as competition, not for reality. But again, the spectrum, the reality, the pressure testing of everything, this is crucial. And that's what people don't understand. Like everything has been battle tested, has been tested with force on force, right? Of course, when we do it, we mentioned about eye gouging, biting, there's a simulation, but just like with a little pressure, people can see like, well, I will move my head out of here. Well, and that would create me the opportunity to move. But anyway, that's my take when it comes to the RMA. My process as a student and then becoming a coach, teaching RMA at our school. So I think it would be great for people to understand, even if you're training different things, even if you're not focused on the reality of self-defense, combatives, and confrontations, or if you train martial arts not thinking that deep, at least that might open your horizons and people might be able to see more about what we're talking. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when it comes to things like, even when you're talking about like nerve attacks and things like that, body handles, things like that, they're not necessarily going to end a fight, but they, like I tell people, they can create space. They can be facilitators, and different tactics have different purposes. I think some people always can think of things like the knockout or the kill or that kind of thing. But I always tell people that different tactics can be used. Some are used to weaken, some are used to distract, some are used to deter, some are used to damage, some are used to destroy, some are used to kill. So there's every tactic can have a different purpose and maybe used one time. It may, for example, even just knowing your, like we call pain points or nerve attacks, even if you're doing your cut kick or your round kick to someone's leg, when you have a more of an awareness of where to place those kicks, you can land one kick to someone's leg, one cut kick or one tie kick to someone's leg, and it's like you threw 20 kicks compared to someone else that doesn't throw it right. And they hit you and so you hardly notice it. So if the more you start to get precise with even where you place your kicks, where you place your punches, elbows, things like that, all those things make it. And it's the same thing with grappling. If you look at it, for example, I always call this respectfully when I talk about someone, say, applying like a choke or something like that. I always call it old man technique, because that's the concept of jiu-jitsu, right? You want minimal effort, maximum results, right? So you want that total efficacy, or its efficiency and effectiveness. So you put that move on, and with the least amount of effort, you're getting maximum results. When I say old man technique, I say that with the highest level of respect.
No, absolutely. No, I think it's the pressure.
Because the old people, those guys have been doing it forever, the ones that maybe they don't have the physical attributes and strength anymore, but they can put that choke, and it's like the person feels like their head, like it's like as soon as they feel it, like you're done. And that's another thing. So when you hear those things, for example, if a pain point or pressure point just creates enough space to set up that elbow, which I damage you with, and maybe I set up the choke that I put you out with, or put the person out with, that's how we think in terms of using those. So it's like, any type of a team, like an Army Special Forces, ODA, they have different guys that do different things, and each one kind of sets up the next one. And they really not is one more important than the other. They all work together synergistically like a team to kind of achieve the best result. And I tell people, if the best thing to do is use grappling, I use grappling. If the best thing to do is strike, I strike. If the best thing to do is bite, I bite. If the best thing to do is use a weapon, use a weapon. If it's not effective or useful to do the pain point or nerve attack or anything like that, or biting or eye gouging, don't do it. It's pretty simple. But the point is not to limit yourself from being able to do it. So I think the person that listens to this and go, anybody can bite, a dog can bite, or anybody can bite, it's just cheesy. It's a cheap technique. Anybody can punch that has two healthy arms, but you're not going to punch like, Tyson Fury or Mike Tyson. Anybody can do an armbar that's fairly intelligent. You can go into one class and do an armbar, but they're not going to do an armbar like you are, like Hodger Gracie is going to do it. So it's, you can do the skill, but like one of the things we do is we really have technique behind our biting, technique behind our eye gouging, pain points. And everything we do is designed with kind of getting you to that highest level, the highest level option, or we call high priority tactic, as quickly as possible. I don't want to just be pushing around on a nerve with a guy and just getting him more angry. But if I can create that space just enough to escape something or set up that major move that's going to finish the situation, that's why I would use those things. And I think that's where some people look at, like you said, the goofy stuff online where the guy's doing, knocking out people through blankets and silly stuff like this. It's just really corny and just not realistic.
It's not realistic. And one thing I would like to say to the listener, new viewer, new listener, this is a new podcast, a new episode, first episode. My advice would be be open-minded, right? I know many people, because I really, I'm deep into firearms. I'm trying to become a really proficient shooter. I've been training a lot. I'm an FFL. I do sell firearms. I do train people, and etc. In the same way, I'm going through my path, learning edged weapons with the SIAC and the Tienza. But so those are lethal things, right? If I draw the firearm, and if I cannot use it at the escalation, of course, it's going to be a lethal tool. A blade will be a lethal tool. A blunt object, which it could be a trapo or a flexible weapon with the weight and at one extremity, or anything else, it can become a deadly tool. However, not all confrontations, or most of the confrontations, are not really like lethal or deadly situations. And because I train with many people, they say like, well, if it's they don't feel they need to train or understand the whole spectrum, especially when we go back to explaining in more detail the 7 mat. A lot of people they think like, well, I don't really need to know this as much because I have this. Yeah, but then I tell them, well, if you draw that tool, you are immediately escalating.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the case is not of, like I said, of a deadly situation, the best, of course, is to use, like you said, the minimum amount of force to obtain the most control, to stop the threat. And stopping the threat, it could be like, I was giving this example. Let's say we're going to talk about the 4As. I'm not going to break that down now, but let's say, for instance, I'm in a bar, and I don't know why I went to a bar, but I'm there with my wife, and some fight break out in a way that I cannot leave. I cannot de-escalate, or I find myself in the middle of this altercation for whatever reason. We talk more about how I should have de-escalated, avoided going there to the place, and etc. But okay, at that moment, I'm not going to draw any tools. I'm not going to draw any deadly tools, right? Because maybe it's just some dude that is drunk, and he said something about my wife. I didn't care because it's just words. I'm leaving, and this guy's like, grab me and turn me. And then now it's on. It doesn't need necessarily be in a way that I might strike the guy. I might just hold it. I might just restrain. But it's very important to be well rounded in a way that we can control the escalation of a confrontation to avoid going deadly if it's not a case of, say, an active shooter or somebody break into my house, which is, a whole different level. But anyway, I think that's my advice. Be open-minded, understand the necessity and of learning everything, and don't hide your weakness behind excuses, right? I think that's my advice for our new viewers and our new listeners. And then getting into the subject of this episode. So first is intro. We try to explain. We're going to explain more throughout our future episodes. But in this one, we decided to talk a little bit about competition, getting ready for competition. In this, I think you can use these principles that Shihan will explain, and I'll go over why he wrote this essay or thesis, and this is part of our association, and I thought it was amazing. But I think that's a recipe for any type of competition. I think it can be something that you can use. It's a formula that you can use, 12 steps that you can use in many other scenarios, in many other situations, not just related to martial arts, right? So very quick here for the listeners and the viewers. We, in our association, my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Association, I do have a methodology that is not the methodology, is a methodology. And my methodology, like I was talking before with Shihan, is that I like my students, when they move to the first belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is the blue belt, I like my students to have a solid fundamental understanding of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, using what, Shihan said, it's kind of like old school. Some people think like it's old man game. I think it's probably the safest set of techniques that can shut down so many other techniques and give an overall understanding of grappling in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then we move to the second belt, purple belt. Then I introduce more new concepts, a lot of more new school Jiu-Jitsu related to sports, competition. And by the time people becoming brown belts, they should have already their identity or building their identity on the mats based on what Shihan said before off the screen, based on your body type, your age, your weight, your skills, your maybe physical attributes in general, like things that maybe like you have a bad knee, so you might not do this and that. But anyway, according to your own characteristics and based on our curriculum, a brown belt and black belt should build their identity, right? And also be able to teach everything. So that's how we work, inside Core Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Association, and that's the vision behind. And so we have processes, right? So I like the processes. I like the how they call, like this is important moments that can create good memories. So for instance, when people go from white to blue, they have to go through a workshop. I review everything. It's kind of like time consuming. People leave tired because a lot of repetitions. Purple belt, same thing. Brown belts, they go through a Shark Tank. So it's kind of a little bit brutal, but it's a nice process. It's almost initiation in a good way. There's no negativity. There's no nothing. It's not like we're trying to punish people, nothing like that. It's not like hazing or anything. And black belts, of course, is tougher. Brown belts to black belts should already know how to teach classes. So they do some sort of internship, like where I ask my brown belts to go there and teach some classes, and I watch them. I don't give them a subject. Sometimes I give them a subject. Anyway, so there's a process. And there was something missing when it came to black belts moving to the new degree, to upgrading their belts. So in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the first 3 degrees you get after 3 years each. So you get your black belt after 3 years, your first degree, 6 years, second degree, 9 years, third degree. Correct? So now we have 1, 2, 3. And then after that is every 5 years, 4th degree, 5th degree, 6th degree. And then after that is every 7 years or something like that. But other than that, it was just time, right? You spend the time and you get it. And then Walt asked me, like, Professor, what would you like me to do in order for me to move to the next degree? And actually, he didn't need anything, just to show up and I would, put the degree on your belt. But then we thought that maybe that's a great opportunity to make sure that our black belts are not stagnated. They are looking for something else. They are becoming better by studying more martial arts. And by the way, future episodes, you need to subscribe, like, send your comments, because before we recorded, Shihan just showed me like some statistics and I'm like blown away. And this would be amazing for you guys, like, submission statistics. And even we're going to talk about Gordon Ryan, and this is going to be super cool. And so what I asked him to do, going back to his assignment, what I asked him to do was, because Shihan studies a lot, and then I'm here introducing you guys, and he's a co-host, but it's good for you guys to know. He's a researcher. He's like a scientist of martial arts. And I asked, like, why not write a thesis about competition? What is involved, and etc. So we're going to start breaking down his process. He's going to show us here. We're going to share the screen, and that's his thesis. So for the next maybe 2 or 3 episodes, we're gonna explore this this work, this essay, this thesis, and that he wrote specifically to help competitors. So time is yours, Shihan. We have we're going to talk about this like for maybe 15-20 minutes, and then we go to the 2 next blocks. And anyway, I'm excited for this.
Thank you, Professor. So before I'm starting at the end, which is just because it kind of is a summary of the whole thing, and then we'll kind of get a little bit more into the details as far as whatever time we have available to us this evening. So by being aware of the 3 phases, so that we have 3 phases that I want people to be aware of when it comes to competition preparedness, and those are the pre, present, and post. Pre basically means what happens before the competition. Present is what happens while you're at the competition, and post involves everything that happens after the competition. What does that mean? So obviously there's a number of different things I have to do in the pre, there's a number of different things I have to be aware of in the present, and there's a number of different things I have to do in the post, after the event, like evaluate your performance, and maybe there's things you could have done better. What did you get caught with? What can we do about that so it doesn't happen again in the future? I can tell one interesting story. I had one of my students that was competing, quite a few years ago in Naga events. And I remember that he competed against a guy and he did really well against all his opponents. And finally got this one guy and he got caught with one particular move. And this particular student was training with me like 6-7 days a week, literally rolling training with me every single day after the competition. So he just started going all out. So he got caught with a move in the competition, lost his match. And then we went back to the competition, went back to the school and training, the academy. And then we just started working. I told him, I said, look, you're going to go back to competition. I said, you'll get caught with something else, but you are never getting caught with that move again. So even though we trained and rolled every single day, we worked on that move every possible way it could be set up, every possible way. He knew how to execute it himself offensively, and he knew how to defend it like every possible way you could imagine. We did conditioning drills to strengthen him so it would be hard to get him. We did technical refinement, all these different little nuances. Interesting thing is that same opponent that he competed against came in to train maybe 6 to 8 months later, and he rolled with the guy, and he must have tapped the guy 15 times, and a minimum of 10 to 15 times, just every time. Nice. The guy couldn't get him one time, and it just went to a whole nother level, and especially not with that move, obviously, but it was a whole nother level. So just taking that information back to the academy and working on it. Of course we don't want to lose, but if you're going to lose, make sure you get a lesson from that loss. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the post. So what do you do in the pre? What do you do in the present? What do you do in the post? And that's really what this is all about. So those are the stages. And then there's 12 different elements that we want you to be aware of. And I've kind of got them listed here, as you can see. And the first element is the mental and emotional preparation. How do you prepare yourself psychologically and emotionally for competition? What do you need to know psychologically and emotionally when you're at the competition? And how does that come into play after the competition? And you might say, well, what's the big deal with after the competition? Well, there's a lot of things. For example, you could go back to your academy and just have the attitude, you know what, I'm done with competition. I don't even know if I want to do jiu-jitsu anymore. Maybe I'm just going to quit. I'm going to call it, I'm done. I've had enough of this. I'm good enough. I've learned enough. That could be the case. But if you kind of know in advance, you've already kind of like said, nope, that's not going to be the case. I'm going to keep working at this. I'm not going to quit until I get to, a higher and higher level. I'm going to achieve my goals. I'm going to accomplish. So by having this kind of in your game plan to begin with, even kind of prevents you from quitting. And I can tell you one thing, having been a black belt myself, in other martial arts, obviously over 40 years, and been a black belt quite a few years now in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, and having practiced it for many, many years, that I've never seen a person come back to my academy after having stopped martial arts 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever, who stopped at maybe short of black belt, whatever, and said, I'm glad that they said that they were glad they did it. Every single person says, I should have never stopped. It was one of the biggest 100%. Mistakes I've ever made was to stop. So I can tell you, if you're a blue belt, you're thinking about stopping, promise you one thing. Years from now, you're going to say it's one of the worst mistakes you've ever made. If you're a purple belt, same thing. If you're a brown belt, if you're a black belt, same thing. And the truth is, one of the things we've lost in martial arts is the fact that for many, many years, at least when I was growing up, people always thought a black belt is just the beginning. That's what they would always say. Black belt is just the beginning. It's like, all your primary skills, your essentials and your fundamentals are solid now. Now you can really start to learn. People have kind of forgotten that. And it's kind of like, so they're thinking like you hit black belt, like that's the end all. No, it's not the end all. It's not even close to the end all. In fact, I always think the best attitude to have every day, regardless of the rank you have, is to wake up every day and say, I'm a white belt. Have that we call the white belt mindset. Even though you may be a black belt, you may be even a master level instructor, but in your mind, compared to where you want to be, you're like, I'm a white belt, like I'm just starting. And that kind of keeps you moving. And I'm always training in different martial arts. So I'm not trying to get too off topic here, but that's just very important. So a lot of times, even when we talk about in this post, if you have a good solid plan in the pre, the present, and the post, all the conflict, all the struggles, all the psychological and emotional issues you may run into during any one of those stages can be sort of you can kind of like deal with them in advance so that they don't throw you off your game. You don't get thrown off your game while you're at the event. You don't get thrown off your game before the event, and you don't get thrown off your game after the event. So you've kind of connected yourself to training and doing this as a lifelong experience. I always tell people, you're only a martial artist. You've only proven yourself a true martial artist when you die a martial artist. If you train for 20 years and you quit 20 years before you die, because to me, a martial artist is someone that's his life. That's his lifestyle. Bushido for life, like we say in the core, right? Core Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Bushido for life. It's a lifestyle. You may not always be the best. You may not always be at the top, like when you're older and you get weaker, but you're going to be a lot better than you would be if you stop. So just kind of have that mindset that this is a lifestyle and it's something you do as long as you live. You may not be able to do it as best as good as you could before. I have issues sometimes with my back and hips and knees, but I'm in my almost my mid 50s now, but I'm not quitting. If I was in a wheelchair, God forbid, I would still keep training somehow, but Lord willing, that never happens. But that's my mindset. And that's kind of how I've programmed and trained myself. So anyway,
Absolutely.
So kind of getting back to these things. So the first one is the mental and emotional preparation that you need in the pre, present, and post. Second is coach connection. You need to be connected to your teacher. You need to be connected to your coach. Now, he may not be able to help you all the time in every single way. He's got numerous students. He's got number of obligations. He could have multiple schools running. And his heart may be to try to help everybody. But there usually comes a point in an experienced coach's life when he realizes, as much as I want to help every person imaginable in jiu-jitsu, I only have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year, just like everybody else. And he's limited. He's got to train himself. He's got to work out. He's got to update his education and training. He's got to train certain people. But so that's where this mentoring process too, that we have in the core Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu organization, which I love, is so important, because what it does is it creates what we call a force multiplier effect. You're taking other qualified guys, teaching them the expertise or the information that Professor Luigi can offer to you, or other instructors, maybe myself and other people, can offer you to help you to kind of go to the next level. But we impart that into these mentors and these coaches, and then they're able to develop more people, because one person can only do so much. So that's why this coach connection is important, irregardless whether he's working with you step by step, every step of the way at the tournament, whatever the case might be, or whether he's kind of connecting you with other mentors or other students to work with you, whatever the case may be. It's very important to get your coach involved in any way he's willing to. He could give you some really valuable advice and information and insights that could save you a lot of problems, a lot of struggles, a lot of trials, and maybe even let you realize whether or not maybe it's the right time to do it yet. At least put it in perspective, and maybe he's going to be all for it, saying 100% you should do it. Or, maybe you should just go through this first, get these basics down, get to this level first, and then it might be the right time. So it depends on you. But I'm just saying these are some things that could come into play. And again, I do want to say one other thing regarding this whole outline. If you're an experienced black belt or coach or trainer, you're not going to get as much out of these daily dozen as someone that's just new. But let's primarily focus on the white belt and the blue belt, maybe even purple, but white, especially white and blue belts. This kind of information is very valuable to them. And if it's valuable to them, it's valuable to you as a coach, because you can impart this information to them. Now, you may know this, you may even do this in your coaching and training, but by having this information readily available to you and to your students, now you're able to, instead of doing all the fishing for them, instead of catching them the fish, you teach them how to fish and feed them for a lifetime. So that's really the point of this. So even the experienced instructor, you probably know a great deal of what I'm going to say in this outline. But the way that it will help you is in that it will save you time having to explain this over and over and over again, especially when we implement this information or this outline into our core curriculum, so that you can just, if your student has a question, the basic ideas about how to prepare before, during, and after event, here's this outline, here's this PDF.
Yeah.
And if you have some notes and things you'd like to add to it, add it to it, or even let me know, because I'd like to know too, if you have lots of experience, some things that maybe I missed or just didn't happen to put into the outline this time. So just realize how valuable it's going to be for both experienced coaches and the newer guys. And so I just want to stress that point. So that's your coach connection. Get your coach, your trainer, your professor involved with the training process, with your competition process. And then the next part is the professional practical matters. That's dealing with all the red tape that goes into the event, knowing, going on the website, getting the information, getting the forms, when you want, deciding, when to register, when you want to register, being aware of the brackets, all the rules, all the different elements of the competition, knowing that element. And there's an element of that before the event, during the event, and after that, which we'll, again, get into more detail during the more in detailed outline that I'll be getting into. Next is the training partners and trainers. So having good trainers, people involved, it may be your professor, it may not be, maybe other mentors and other coaches and other trainers in the school. In my particular school, we have people that, as they go through the levels, they go from being a practitioner, a regular student, to being a trainer, to being a coach, to being an instructor, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the process that we kind of use. And a trainer may not quite be to the level of like a coach or an instructor, but he can still put you through drills and work with you and you know what I mean, help you work on your conditioning, help you work on your drilling, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of good to make sure you have all three of those levels. And we'll get into that more in depth later, like I said, as part of the outline. But I want to say this: training partners and trainers are so important. There is not one fighter on this planet that would be a world champion without training partners, sparring partners, people to work with, trainers and training partners. You can't. People say this is what I love about jiu-jitsu is it's a one-man sport. It absolutely is not a one-man sport. That is another totally. Yes, you have to go out and do the fighting for yourself. That's true. I get it. However, you show me. I don't care if you're talking about Roger Gracie, if you're talking about Gordon Ryan, if you're talking about Galvao, if you're talking about Professor Luigi, Sal Ribeiro, any of these guys. I don't care who you're talking about. You tell me how they're going to go to the gym, never have anybody to help them with conditioning, never have anybody to roll with, never have anybody to practice their submissions on, never have anybody to practice their sweeps on, do any of that stuff, drills, techniques, sweeps, sparring, conditioning. No people, just them. And you're going to go win a world championship because you're special? I don't think so. You need training partners. So the reason I say this is this. They're the unsung hero of the martial arts world oftentimes because they do so much to make people champions. And they oftentimes go so unrecognized. So this just really, if someone's your training partner, your sparring partner, your training partner, you need to have so much appreciation and thanks for that person who gives their time and body to be beat on and cranked and twisted and thrown and so on and so forth, so that you can accomplish some of your dreams. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
And so the next is conditioning, warm-ups, training, workout plans, journaling. With regards to conditioning, you need to know how to warm up properly. You need to know how to train properly. You need to, that involves conditioning and drilling and rolling and all those different things, and do it at the right amount. So you're not doing it too much, too little, so on and so forth. Come up with different workout plans, and then journal. Take notes about everything, how you feel, what you ate, what you weighed, different things. Maybe you took a supplement, you felt a little sick in your stomach, and then you need to maybe, if you see that multiple times, take that out of your routine. You got to, so it allows that journaling allows you to recognize certain little things. Well, maybe it was because of this. Maybe it was because I ate this. Maybe it was because I took this. There's so many different things. Or when you're journaling, one of the things I'll also say is if I'm journaling during my training, if you're rolling and say in a however many 2 month, a period, and you get caught with 10 Kimuras, and you get caught with one arm bar, and you get caught with 3 triangle chokes, but that move that you got caught the most with, if it's 10 Kimuras was the one that you're getting caught the most with, you need to make a note of that now and say, I need to work on this. I need to go to my coach, go to my professor, give me some ideas, some ways to defend that, some ways to prevent that. What am I doing wrong? Do you see any mistakes I'm making as far as my position, leaving something out in a certain way, or when I'm doing certain techniques? So whatever that happens to be, and it doesn't have to be a Kimura, that was just an example of one type move. Could be a sweep you're getting caught with, could be a position you're getting stuck in. Journal these things so you can kind of identify your weaknesses and work that into your training regimen, work that into your training camp. That's how you're actually going to help yourself to improve and grow. And again, this might seem like common sense to the experienced person, but the beginner needs to know this. We have in our program, we take the word SECT, S-E-C-T, SECT, Survive, Escape, Control, Terminate. Variable Solo Ribeiro has something similar called Survive, Escape, Kill. I didn't like the word kill personally. I think that's a little bit of a extreme word for competition jiu-jitsu, but terminate kind of covers it both ways. But besides the fact that I also like the idea of having control in the concept. So I I broke it down as this: survive first. You learn to survive against a person's attacks. If they can't submit you, that's a big part of defense. And I look at Elio Gracie, who would, there's a story that of him rolling with a lot of younger guys where they when he was older in his 90s and stuff like that, maybe he couldn't throw him around and so on and so forth, but they couldn't submit him. He could survive. If you're 90 and weigh 135, 140 pounds, and and guys that are world champions, and you're maybe 4 times their age, can't tap you 3-4 times your age, you're winning in my book. It's kind of like winning. So learn to survive first. If someone can't knock you out in MMA, or submit you, if someone can't submit you in jiu-jitsu, even though you can lose quote unquote by points, it's still a lot better to lose by points than it is to lose by submission. So survive first, master survival first, then learn to escape positions, controls, and submissions, then learn to control your opponent, keep them control in various positions, and then learn to terminate, to finish that person. So that's kind of a little bit of a process that we can kind of use when we're developing our skills. And when you're journaling, you can work on, what do I need to work better at surviving? What do I need to work? What positions do I need to work on as far as being better at escaping? What do we need to work on as far as being better at controlling opponent, and then finishing submissions? So again, just giving you some ideas how that plays into the journaling when we're kind of tracking all those things and how we can kind of the types of things that we can journal. Next, that we have nutrition and hydration. Obviously, and we're going to get into this more detail. I use one analogy in the thesis, which was this: take the best fighter on the planet in MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, kickboxing. I don't care what the combat sport is, and starve that person for 25 days, and then the last 3 days before the end of that 25 days, barely give them any water. Maybe don't give them any water the last day, and barely give them any the 2 days before that. And then have them compete against someone that they normally would be a little bit of a challenge, but they beat consistently. They will get destroyed. Even put them up against, this guy could be a high-level black belt, and you put him against a good purple belt who's in good shape, and they haven't eaten in 25 days or barely drank anything in 3 days, they will get destroyed. So nutrition and hydration is so important, and doing it the right way consistently on a regular basis is exceptionally important. And I know Professor Luigi maybe will even in the future talk about the perfecting athletes and that type of information to go more in depth about. Am I saying right, Professor?
Perfecting athletes.
As far as different ways that you can eat, and as far as diet and nutrition, all those things, and how supplementation, how important that can be to you as a fighter.
100%.
And then technique and strategy, technical strategy development. You gotta have work on your technique. Again, maintain your strengths and fix your weaknesses. I always say that there's three key things to ask yourself as a martial artist when it comes to anything you do: what's good, what's bad, what's missing. Those three questions do so much to make you a better warrior. What's good in my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? For example, if we're talking about Jiu-Jitsu, but this could be RMA, could be my striking, could be my preparedness, could be my firearms training, whatever the case may be. But let's just put it specifically in regards to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now. What's good? What's bad? What's missing? And don't fool yourself and say nothing's bad. Baloney. Or nothing's missing. Baloney. We all have areas that aren't as good as other areas, right? So, but if you're aware of that, if you had a list, I feel confident, not arrogant, but I'm really good in these areas. Not so good in these areas. These are my weaker spots. Even if you shouldn't have quote unquote weak areas if you're trying to compete at a high level. You should be well-rounded and be versatile, versatile and well-trained in all the areas. But you know what I'm saying? Like you're going to have weaker areas, right? You're going to have areas that this is my dominant position, dominant approach. This is my not so, and then some areas that are just missing. This is just not quite there. I got to bring this up to another level. So there's always going to be something that's missing. There's always going to be something that's weaker. If we don't like the word bad, we can say weaker. And there's always going to be an area that's strong. So what's good, what's bad, what's missing. So use those that kind of mentality to kind of analyze and evaluate your training. When you do it from an RMA perspective, it's a lot easier because you're going to have an easy time finding stuff that's bad and missing when it comes to RMA. The more you consolidate down to one art, it becomes a little easier to become more well-rounded. So keep that in mind. So your technical skills, and then strategic development, developing strategies, specific strategies, not only that work for you, for your, what tends to be your strong points and being aware of your strengths and weaknesses and maybe areas that are a little bit missing. Maybe you're more just straight jiu-jitsu, but you don't have a great wrestling background or a great judo background. Like you haven't wrestled a lot, you haven't done a lot of judo. So there may be a strategy you take. But then again, if you were a, NCAA, Division I, wrestling champion, there might be a totally different strategy you're going to use based on that and use that to your advantage. Right. So having that understanding of strategy is very important to develop a style or strategy that works for you. And then the other side of strategy is also developing strategies that allow you to deal with different types of opponents, whether you maybe know in advance that what that opponent's background is, or whether you kind of determine that while you're training with them and you're able to shift gears and go, whoa, normally I'm the guy that gets to take them, but clearly this person is a much more experienced, much more a skilled wrestler or judo player. So now I've got to modify things and take a little bit of a different approach in trying to beat this person. So that's just an example of technique and strategic development, which can go on and on and on forever. That's just part of it. Rest and rehab. Again, I talked about the food and the hydration from the perspective of a fighter. When we talk about not having food for X amount of days and not having water for a certain amount of days and then having to be Same thing goes for sleep. You want to make it worse? Let's not let this guy sleep for 25 days, not let him eat for 25 days, and then give him barely any water the last 3 days. Then watch how poorly he does in competition. You see what I'm saying? Our bodies need these things to function at a high level, at an optimal level. So making sure that you're getting the right amount of rest and not just sleep. We're not just talking about sleep, but rest sometimes too. As you get older, as you're a little bit more, you've been training a longer time, your body's, endured numerous beatings and injuries and so on and so forth. Sometimes you need to focus on other things, maybe a little more on technique, maybe a little bit more on stretching, maybe a little more, other things as you get older, where you've got the experience, you got the knowledge, but your body is a little more beat up than it was when you started 20, 30 or more years ago, right? So keep that in mind. Sleep heals, rest heals. It's gonna, and the same thing rehabbing. Maybe you got a bit of an issue with your knee. You know how to back off on that, do other things, letting your training partners know, hey, I do have this issue. Not to be a crybaby or a whiner. That's not being a crybaby or a whiner. That's being intelligent. Because if you have something that you legitimately, I'm not talking about an excuse. An excuse is when you just come up with some I would say reason, but some reason that you can't do something when there's not really a reason. A reason is different. A reason is different than an excuse. A reason would be like if you just had knee surgery. One of my top students right now, he just had knee surgery literally about a week and a half ago. For him to jump out on the mat now and start rolling with a bunch of people would not be brave. It would be foolish. It would not be. So he doesn't have an excuse. He has a reason not to roll right now, right? Just literally a couple of weeks ago, he's still using a cane or crutches to walk around. That would be foolish. So, but you need to have the humility of rest. And I can tell you an example myself. Years ago when I cracked my sacrum was partly because someone was doing a judo class on a carpeted floor over cement, and we're practicing like sacrifice throws. I'm like, well, first of all, who does that? They actually had the karate guys out on the mats, and they got the guy doing the judo on a carpeted floor. His back, like literally, like back in 89, 90.
Backwards.
But yeah. So, and that cost me but I didn't want to be the one not to do it. And plus I was probably one of the only ones that was in the seminar that, maybe it was like 3 or 4 other guys. A lot of the other guys were a lot newer to grappling, so they didn't know. So I was helping a lot of guys do it. Of course, all it takes is that combination of that. I must have done it 20, 30 times, but you just do it one wrong move and the guy pulls you, you're doing that sacrifice and you come down on the cement, and I cracked my sacrum. So that cost me, a lot of issues for years. I mean, I always was able to work it back in and get it back in check so I could keep training, but it's probably, my whole body feels great, but that's that one spot that can give me issues, on and off. And Professor, I'm sure you have, similar type things.
I'm going through right now, my neck and my shoulder blade and rotator cuff.
But that was a little bit like me not using wisdom, right? I probably should have looked and said, look, I love doing this stuff, but the guy's doing sacrifice throws on a hotel floor with carpet over cement. Not the best, not the ideal place to be teaching judo technique. So should have just bowed out on that one and not done it. But anyway, that's the way it goes. So anyway, so just knowing to say no sometimes, when to say yes, when to say no. Maybe you need rest, maybe you don't. I know being younger, there wasn't a time that someone would ask to roll or spar where I would say no, because I would literally, you could do it in the morning, in the afternoon, then you come in the evening, you just work trained all day long and you're fried, you need a break. Someone asks, you're like, well, I got to say yes, they asked. So, but that's training with your ego, not with your brain. So anyway, so that all plays into rest and rehab. There's more to it than that, but it's very important. Drills for skills, training and doing specific drills that develop specific skills, not just drilling for no reason, but whether it's strength and conditioning, combat specific, things that improve your grip, things that improve your choking strength, things that improve your position, your hip strength, all that, so on and so forth, as well as drills that are specifically geared towards escaping certain positions. Training, we used to do things like we call sharpshooting drills, where you train with someone, maybe they're a lower rank, and when you roll with them, you'll be like, okay, I'm going to go for so there's 2 ways you could do it. One, I could go for an armbar, and you don't know what I'm going for, but I pick that one move, and that's what I go for. And I don't do any other move. So it gives the lower rank or less experienced person more of a chance. Another way is you actually tell them, I'm going to go for a knee bar. That's my move. I'm going to submit you with a knee bar, but you got to defend it. So that gives them a better chance to escape and counter things, but it forces you to kind of be a little more strategic because they actually know the move is coming. So that's just one example of a type of drill for skill, where you're working on a specific drill. You got to impose that approach, but you got to be a lot more strategic and sneaky now because they actually know it's coming. obviously putting yourself in certain precarious positions, maybe starting, 50, 60, 70% of the way into a submission, working on your escapes and so on and so forth. So put yourself in positions that you might wind up in competition. A lot of people just roll and they roll. And if they tap together, it's great, but they never put themselves in those lousy positions that a lot of times you can wind up in a competition situation and just work on getting out of there. Like just, 100%. Okay, start with the choke on my neck. You got it maybe 80, 90% on and then start working from there. So, or getting those just getting the hand fighting positions. Guys got the seatbelt on. Guys got wrist control ready. He's going to go for the choke and you're going to go for defending, escaping the position and getting into a more dominant position. If he gets you, start over. If he gets you, start over. He gets you, start. Now you're mastering that position. So when you get in competition, it's not going to be such a shocker because you've been there thousands of times and have different people on your back, not just the same person. Mix it up. So those are just some ideas. There's a lot more to it, but I'm sure you guys have lots of your own ideas, but some ideas
develop more.
For drills, for skills, and then rolling and sparring, doing the amount of rolling, right amount of sparring, different types of opponents, people that are better wrestlers, better judo players, better guard players, better top, kind of pressure fighters. Having them sometimes change up or switch up their style or strategy. Maybe this guy's usually does one thing and he just totally changes it up and goes for something a little different to kind of throw you off, because that kind of adds that little element of surprise, which sometimes you don't get in your training academy because you start to know the guys. But if they just decide in their mind, hey, I'm going to more do this style, which I don't usually do, just to throw him off, because you're maybe sort of mentally preparing for one another, that gives you that little bit more, that element of surprise, which is what's going to happen in competition, and kind of brings that into the training academy environment. And then research every aspect of the sport. So when I say research every aspect, I'm talking not just the jiu-jitsu itself, not just the competitive, which we could talk about for a minute, but I'm talking about everything. Know the rules, go to the events, watch how they hand out their trophies, how they do the weigh-ins, how they announce the events, what the mats are set up like, knowing when you need to be on deck, all these different things, like analyze everything, get to know the people at the front desk, just every possible way you can analyze the event from above and below and to the side and right, left, everything. So like that multi-dimensional perspective of evaluating everything about the event. Why? Because when you go to an event and you don't know where this is or what you need to do or when this is going to happen, all those little things are just little extra stressors that you don't need in an environment where there's probably going to be some stress anyway, because you're going there to compete against other tough guys and girls that want to, take you out. So the more you can do to minimize or eliminate or alleviate the potential stressors that occur at competition, the less stress there's going to be. So it could be, and it's all cumulative. It may not seem like knowing how to do a weigh-in is a big deal, but it can just, when you don't know where to go and what to do and you haven't done it, it can just be a little bit of stress. And you don't know, how you're going to warm up or who you're going to warm up with. It may not be a lot of stress, but it's a little stress. And all these little stressors add up. And the point isn't to eliminate all stress, because you'll never eliminate all stress in competition, but to make that weight as light as possible, so you can go from having 10,000 pounds of stress on you when you come into a competition or come in with 40 pounds of stress. There's a big difference. So it's still stress, but not as overwhelming. So that's the important aspect that's one aspect of researching. Know the event, know the sport, know everything about it, know about research about your different opponents and watch their styles and what they do and so on and so forth. And then another aspect, of course, could just be researching matches in general while you're there live, while you're watching other videos, could be stuff online. But when you watch stuff, like the way I'll watch things, for example, I can watch someone doing an exact skill or tactic or technique. I will just watch what their right arm does through the whole technique. I'll focus in on that. Then I watch exactly what their left arm and left hand does, just the whole thing. And then what is their right leg exactly doing? Where's their knee position? Where's their foot? Where's their toes? Are they live toes? Are they on the flat of the foot? Are they, so I'm watching all these things when they transition, how is their weight shift? Where's the posture of their head? So it's not just like looking at it. You don't want to just look. You need to study. And sometimes studying, you can think you're getting, because you're looking at the whole picture. It's okay to look at the whole picture, but then dissect it into little bitty pieces. Is it how much they're pressuring the hips and the response even of the person they're doing it on, how the pressure is affecting them. All these different things are so important. So when you research, try to hit it from as many angles as possible try to look at it with every little nuance and every little detail of everything they're doing. Was it with gi? Was it with no gi? So on and so forth. That's how you want to take notes, write things down. You may never use the notes again, but just something about the act of actually just writing things down that kind of allows you to kind of absorb the information at a much more deep level than if you don't do that. And then the last thing is replicating that competition dynamic. And that means basically trying to do in your academy or in your training before the event everything you can to simulate that competition, whether you're doing in-school competitions, whether you're doing mock matches in the academy, but you can have that timer up on the screen. You can do all these, every little thing that just makes you, again, more familiar with the environment. And again, you're not going there where you have no stress, but knowing these things, expecting these things, being used to these things, being aware of the point scoring and all those things, advantages and so on and so forth, all those things is going to put you in a situation where you've eliminated a large amount of stress so that you can go in there and just focus on your opponent. One thing I didn't talk about earlier too was the warm-ups, how you warm up properly. We will get into that when we detail the lesson in the future. So this is just the opening or the introduction to this thesis on preparedness, on the daily dozen, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu daily dozen for dominance training information that we have here. I went through the 3 Ps and I went through a basic overview of the 12 elements of the daily dozen. I'm thinking in future episodes, now we can take each one of these elements, the mental and emotional, the coach connection, the professional and practical matters, the training partners and the trainers, the conditioning and both involving warm-ups and training and conditioning, workout plans and journaling and all that stuff, the nutrition and the hydration, technical and strategic elements, rest and rehab,
drills for skills,
drills and skills, rolling and sparring, researching in every aspect and study, as well as replication. We can go through these in more detail in the future, but this just gives you at least a good overview of the thought process, and realize that all 12 of these, there's an element or an aspect of all 12 of these in each of the 3 stages or phases: the pre, the present, and the post. So we'll use that as our overview this evening, and in the future we can go in more detail into each one of these, and hopefully this will help you with your game.
Yeah, I love it, and I think will be great to in the future, like you said, episode 2, we start breaking down at least like number 1, number 2, maybe if we have time, number 3, and then the following one, the 4, 5, 6, and then maybe like we can because then I know you wrote so much more in each item, and I can also pitch in based on my my experience as a competitor. I think I always probably have covered a lot of these, but over time, I know how I felt in my first tournament. I always tell my first timers how normal is to feel anxious and nervous and have those some insecurity or a little bit of self-doubt and kind of things like that. I'm looking forward to definitely expand this. And I think this is an overall amazing explanation. And I'm looking forward, to the next one. So we go into our second, I guess, the block, and this is the Reality Warrior Principle. What did you bring for us?
Okay. Let me just. Do you want me to bring that up on the screen, Professor, or should I could just go through the principles?
It's up to you.
Okay. I'll bring it up just so they can see the actual principles. I should have left it there. Right here. Here we go. All right. So we're going to talk about the 4 A's tonight. And so they can see, right here, and I'll explain it more. I'll go a little bit more in depth. But the 4 A's, you have the 4 A's of self-defense or personal protection, which is avert, which is to prevent; avoid, which is to diffuse or de-escalate or escape; ambush, which is to surprise attack, as well as being ready for a surprise attack; and then active combat, which is fully engaged in combat. And I'll just read through this little outlay, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more personally. So the 4 phases of self-defense are used to break down the stages and phases of self-defense. There are 2 stages within 4 phases: pre-active and active combat. They deal with how to prevent hostile conflict, how to de-escalate hostile conflict, how to use the element of surprise to gain an advantage over your opposition, and being prepared to deal with the surprise attacks, as well as how to go toe-to-toe with your opposition in a real fighting situation. So that's just a basic outline of that. Let me just close this up. Okay.
Yeah, I use a lot when I'm teaching, especially I really emphasize in the first phase, which is the prevention that you mentioned, and the de-escalation, but also we debunk a little bit this whole idea that you got to wait for the first punch to be thrown by your opponent to then start acting. Right. And I feel like that's a huge hole. It's a mistake in many people's mindset.
Right. Yeah. Preempting. And so with the four phases, so you have avert, avoid, ambush, and active combat. Now, the first thing I always like to say to people that are new to these is that avert and avoid, from a dictionary definition perspective, are pretty much synonyms, right? They pretty much mean the same thing. But for the purposes of our system, we wanted to kind of differentiate between not getting into a hostile confrontation, doing what you can to not get into it in the first place, and then if you do get into it, doing what you need to do to diffuse, de-escalate, or escape that situation. So that's why we use avert and avoid to mean two different things. And the way that I'll tell people, the easiest way to remember which one comes first, since they both pretty much mean the same thing, is avert starts with AVE and avoid starts with AVO. So O is after E. So avert is first and avoid is second. So it's just a little simple way to kind of memorize it. But from if you went to an English dictionary, they would sort of mean the same thing. But again, for the purposes of RMA and the way we teach people, avert means preventing conflict. So if I don't go the wrong places, do the wrong things, and hang out with the wrong people, I'm much less likely to get into a bad situation. So it's basically making good decisions to where to go, good decisions who to hang around with, good decisions as to what to do and what not to do. So making good, solid choice decisions does not mean a bad situation can't occur. Of course, it can still occur, but it's much less likely to occur than if you make good decisions. And the second one is avoid. And I'll give you a little more breakdown of these, but the second one is avoid. So avoid means if a hostile confrontation does occur, but it hasn't yet gone physical, hasn't become a physical altercation yet, that you have the ability to either verbally diffuse, de-escalate, walk away, run away, drive away. In other words, escape the situation. So there is some hostile tension there, some maybe violent kind of tension occurring there, but the person hasn't gotten physical yet. Can I diffuse? Can I de-escalate? Can I escape that situation? So that's avoid. That's the second thing. And Sun Tzu said something. He said, the highest level of combat is to defeat your opponent without throwing a single blow. And remember this, you win 100% of the fights you don't get into, and a fight that takes 0 seconds is quicker than any physical thing anybody can do. There's no UFC world champion, there's no Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, there's no kickboxing world champion, no boxing world champion that can end a fight quicker than 0 seconds. 0 is it's the quickest quick finish possible. So I know that sounds corny, or maybe it doesn't sound physical enough for some people, but here's the thing. If I don't get into a fight, not only do I not possibly risk injury to myself or my loved ones or family or so on and so forth, but or have to do that damage to another person, but also I may not get sued. I may not go to jail. I may not wind up dead. I may not wind up with a loved one dead. I may not wind up with PTSD. I may not wind up with a loved one with PTSD. Here's a simple example that I used to illustrate. Picture you're driving down the road. You are just this super tough, world champion, whatever you want to think, kickboxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, boxing, whatever. 4 or 5 guys start yelling some nonsense at you out, through your window. You're at a traffic light. So you got your buddy in the back seat, and your 4-year-old, your grandmother, and your significant other in the passenger seat. So you get out of the car to show them, because you're worried what they'll think, that you can beat these guys. So you start fighting the guys. Your spouse jumps out. They knock her down. She breaks her arm. Your kid's freaking out because he sees his dad, beating up all these people, wrecking all these people. Your grandmother has a heart attack and dies. Your buddy's impressed, thinking that you're crushing it. And you get back in the car. Now your wife's got a broken arm. Your kid's traumatized, might have PTSD. Your grandmother's dead because she had her heart attack. And the cops show up and arrest you and bring you to jail. You lose your job. Maybe do 10, 15 years in jail. Lose your freedom, all that stuff. Was it worth it? In other words, if those guys had said something to me and I just drove off Just drive, even whether you drive through the light or just drive off when the light changes, whatever. If they're starting to talk nonsense, just drive away. There's no fight occurred. Now, you didn't impress your buddy, but your grandmother's alive. Your kid doesn't have PTSD. Your wife doesn't have a broken arm, and you're not in jail and losing your job and everything you have. So people with a big ego want to do the physical, or they'll make fun of this stuff like this. They'll find a way to sort of mock or make fun of the cerebral side of defense, when really it's just being smart. And the truth is, why does the person get out of the car and fight in the first place? Not because he's brave, but because he's afraid. He's afraid of what someone will think. What will my spouse think, or my boyfriend or girlfriend think? What will my child think? What will my buddy think? What will someone? They're going to think, I can't beat this person. I'm not able to do it. So you're actually fighting not because you're brave, but because you're afraid. Now, it's different if someone was trying to attack your family and kill them. They were out of the car in the park, and 4 guys came in, and you jumped out and did what you had to do to save their lives. You're fighting out of necessity, not of ego, or to prove a point. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's the difference. So it's not that we don't believe in physical altercation in some cases, but it should be something that you did because you need to, not because you want to, or not because you felt like your ego was being challenged, so you had to prove something, And so that's when we avoid. Avoid by diffuse, de-escalate, negotiate, or escape. So in that case, escaping would have clearly been the better option. And then the third is ambush attack. Now, if I realize I have to do something, there's no way to avoid, escape, whatever the case might be, diffuse, de-escalate. This is where I would possibly use what we call an ambush attack, a stun and run of sorts, to hurt the person so they're no longer a threat to me. And then if it's safe, possible, and feasible, I escape, get out of Dodge as quickly as possible. But if it's not, then I may have to ambush you. So like I said, if it's safe to escape, you escape. But if not, you may have to hit the person, pop them in the eye, do something so that you realize they're not a threat to you, and then get out of there. That's more the ambush or the surprise attack element, preempting the attack. And obviously make sure they're no longer a threat before you escape. You don't want to escape while they're still a threat. You need to make sure that you've neutralized the threat, and then you're able to escape. Now, I realize in some cases we need to stay there because of legal purposes, you might say, and make sure that you don't want to, like, if you use a firearm or something like that, you may wait till the police show up. There's the whole process that we go through with making sure when they are there that you're not holding the firearm and all that stuff, and the way that you're supposed to deal with it from a legal perspective, all that. We'll get into that in future episodes, but more what I'm saying is a situation where maybe there could be multiple guys there. There could be one guy, he's in your face, you stun around, you ambush him, boom, then his buddies are coming across the parking lot. You're going to stay there and wait for the police to show up because you're going to kind of like, you're going to get out of there. So there's plenty of situations where it would be absolutely ignorant to stay there while after you took one person out, because maybe there's multiple other people come in to try to finish what he couldn't finish. So in that case, obviously you would escape. It's just stun and run, do the damage and get out of Dodge. And then active combat is the last option. That's where we fully lock horns with one person or another, a number of people, and may the best person win. Whoever's, and this is where everything goes: biting, eye gouging, striking, weapons, jujitsu, whatever you want to do. It's all on the table, and may the best person win. So I always tell people that all sports take place in phase 4. All sports take place in the active combat phase. You can't really prevent the competition because you got to choose to sign up and register, join, or ask your coach, hey, I want to do an MMA fight, I want to do a kickboxing match. So you got to choose to do that, right? So that doesn't make any sense. Number 2, you can't really diffuse, de-escalate, or escape. I mean, the guy's going to think you're nuts. He's coming across the cage or the ring. Hey, man, look, I don't want to fight. He's not going to believe you, and it's going to look crazy. Or if you jump out of the cage and run into the locker room, so you're not going to escape. Hard to kind of surprise attack the guy, right? He's coming at you, and you're thinking you're going to sneak. He's like expecting you to attack him because he's in the competition where you attack people. So 3 very vital phases in real self-defense are out the window in competition. So you have to go directly to active combat, because that's where it occurs. Now, it doesn't make active combat important. In fact, if averting and avoiding an ambush is not possible, we need to have solid active combat skills. And that's why we both so much encourage doing the stick fighting, the knife fighting, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the wrestling, the judo, the boxing and kickboxing, and so on and so forth, the firearms training. That's why we stress that. But if you think of it this way, everybody wants to be a black belt or an expert or a master or world champion in the active combat stuff, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing. You never hear anybody say, I want to be a black belt or an expert or world champion of averting, not getting in fights, avoiding, diffusing, and de-escalating fights, or even maybe surprise attack somebody. They may, the ambush may be a little bit more relevant in terms of self-defense or preparedness, but nobody ever thinks of the avert and avoid that way. But what I tell my students is this: you have to have the attitude, I want to be a black belt, a master, a world champion of averting, preventing fighting, conflict, of avoiding, diffusing, de-escalating, and escaping conflict, ambush, stun and run, as well as active combat. And that's where all martial arts, I shouldn't say all martial arts, but even the ones that maybe aren't teaching stuff as effective, they almost all focus on primarily the active combat and almost don't do anything to address those other phases. Now, guys like Tony Blauer, who's an absolute mastermind when it comes to the de-escalation, all that, he's brilliant, fear management, all that stuff. Rich Ryan, there's some guys that are just outstanding, but there's not a lot of people that really emphasize that. Those are both guys I've had spent countless hours training with and working with, cross-training, trading information, spend time at their homes, and they spend time at my homes both ways. So, but I totally recommend and endorse their information. But it's just too uncommon out there. There's not enough of it that's being taught, So, but anyway, that's the 4 phases: avert, prevent conflict, avoid, diffuse, de-escalate, or escape, ambush, stun and run, and then active combat, fully engage, lock horns, and may the best person win.
Awesome. I thought that was a great first beginning of this segment within our podcast, the Reality Warrior Principle. And last segment of our podcast, this is going to be like both the Reality Warrior Principle and the Preparedness Principles will be always in our show, because even if we bring different guests, we might pick their brains and have them throw some Reality Warrior Principle and tell us what they do to prepare. But here now, we have the Preparedness Principles with Shihan Walt.
And so tonight for Preparedness Principles, I'm going to keep it really simple. It's going to be just kind of that like initiation, kind of getting the ball rolling, so to speak. When we talk about preparedness, like you see on TV, you have these doomsday preppers and all these things, and some of these people are literally, off their rocker. They're just
too much,
crazy people over the top. However, when you think of it this way, and first of all, I don't like the idea of just preparing for one thing. I think just the idea of being prepared, period, is important, right? It's important. And there's so many dimensions, so many directions we could take this. So I'm going to try to stay on target now. But so what I want to just talk about tonight is, first of all, can anybody give me a good reason why it's a poor idea or a bad idea to not be prepared? So what does being a prepper mean? It just means someone who's prepared. Preparedness means being prepared. A prepper means someone who's prepared. So being prepared obviously makes sense. There's no rational or logical reason you can give me for why being prepared is a bad idea. So that's the first place we want to start from, is just realizing that. So being prepared, being more self-reliant. Nowadays, people don't realize how much they're dependent on electricity, how much they're dependent on the home they live in, on the government for certain things, on medical help, and so on and so forth. There's so many ways that we're so reliant on these things. And if those things are available, it's not necessarily bad to have those things or use those things. We're using electricity right now so we can do this podcast, right? But this is not like a necessity. We won't die if we don't do this podcast. So, but there are certain things that are essentials, and that's what we're going to kind of lead to. But the first thing I want to say when it comes to preparedness, being aware is just start. Just get started. Do something. A lot of people do nothing, or they try to compare to someone else. Maybe this person has all this loads of money and tons of resources, so they can do such a great job as far as preparedness is concerned. And you compare yourself to that person. You got a fixed budget or a limited amount of money. So you go, I can't do it. I don't have enough money. You got a million excuses, but just start. Do something. That's the first thing I want to say. It's like martial arts. Just start. Do something. Second one, no excuses. Don't come up with excuses why you can't start. Just do it. Just start. No matter what you got to do, and do your best. As far as you do, I mean, if you have a limited amount of money, you buy a couple extra cans of food every week. That's something. You stash up a little bit of water. That's something. And when you do that, be creative. I mean, it could be something like maybe you drink milk for the kids. You got milk for the kids. Every time you finish a milk gallon, fill it with water, put it in a storage area. Now you got water, right? So you got water stored away. Other people may have more sophisticated, more high tech, type of water storage units and things like that. And I would do that. Other people would do that and have things at more of a little bit higher level. But do something, because if you have that 20, 30, 40 gallons of water stored away, and suddenly you don't have water, and you need it for hygiene, for cleaning, for flushing your toilets, for cooking, whatever the case might be, you're going to be glad you have it. Okay. So do something, be creative, come up with ways you can do it, even if you have limited resources. And we'll talk about ways to do that in the future. I'm just really trying to prompt you to get the mindset of being in preparedness. The other thing is realize it's a way of life. It's not something you ever complete or finish. Being prepared is just, you're always going to find out areas that what's good, what's bad, what's missing. We talked about earlier. You're going to find out areas that you're not as prepared as you thought you were in certain things. So it's always a process. So keep examining yourself, what's good, what's bad, what's missing. Try to prioritize what's most important first, and then work, kind of expand out from there. But just realize it's a way of life. It's something you just continually do throughout your life and keep trying to get better at research, do a lot of the same things we talked about in that daily dozen. Do your research, do your study, analyze everything, and just do everything you can to be as complete as you possibly can, and realize it's going to be a process. It's a continual process. The other thing is know the essentials. What I mean by the essentials, there's several things, but you need to have shelter. You need to have fire, energy or fire, right? So energy could be your electricity, or could be if you're in an outdoor survival, it could be fire. But energy, fire, we kind of lump those into one thing. You need to have shelter, water, fire, energy. You need to have medical supplies. You need to have a protection and security. I differentiate, even though I kind of put them in the same category, but I differentiate between protection and security. Protection is my ability to protect myself and my loved ones, those that I love. Security is the ability to secure my home, my shelter, my place, and my preps, my supplies, the things that I've prepped. So you can have stuff, but if it isn't secured, that might not be good either, because someone could take that stuff. So knowing what your these essentials are. So if you just think in terms of having your shelter, I think of it this way. When's the last time that you've had to armbar somebody in real life? Not in a dojo, not in the academy, not in the training center, but in real life when they're at your job or out in the street. When's the last time you had to punch somebody out or tie kick somebody or something? Yeah. When's the last time you had to you draw your firearm and shoot somebody? Probably not often. When's the last time you were in a shelter? You're probably in a shelter right now. I'm in a shelter right now while I'm talking to you. When's the last time you had some liquid, some fluid, some water? I just took a sip of my tea. So when's the last time you ate some food? Probably today, right? So making sure that these essentials are always in place is so important. And if there's ever a situation or scenario where you don't have access to them, start with a small amount. Have 3 days worth of food, and then maybe work towards 3 weeks, and then you can build from there, and so on and so forth. But having your water, having your food, having your shelter, realizing shelter is not just in your home. That's your primary home. Your primary shelter is your home, your castle. But your car is a shelter. You can have, maybe you carry things in your vehicle or with you that can be used as shelter. Being aware when you're out in your day-to-day environment of things that could be makeshift shelters, just training yourself to see those things and be aware of those things is going to make you able to find those things much more quickly, because you've already kind of pre-trained to that. So you look, that could be a good shelter. That would protect me from the rain. That would protect me from a storm or hurricane. Start looking at those things now in advance before it actually ever happens. So get your, just start on the base level. All those things I said, just start, no excuses, do your best, be creative. And one other one I didn't say is don't make fun of people that don't have what you have or don't have a lot. If someone has a little cheesy bug out bag with just a little tarp and rope and a little knife and a little water, a little food, and they don't have too much, but it's what they got, they're better off than 80% of the people out there, because most people have nothing. Most people have absolutely nothing. Of course, if you have the better equipment and the better stuff, that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just start, do something. And I always tell people, I don't make fun of anybody's if they have it. I go, good, I'm proud of you, you got it. Let me try to give you some ways that you kind of build on that and improve that. Take it to the next level. And then one last thing is training and practicing. Make sure you train. If you have a firearm, don't just have it, train with it. Don't just have it, practice with it. You got to practice, you got to train, and practice your other skills. There's a few types of preparedness, which we'll talk about in the future. You have high tech, low tech, and no tech. You think of it that way: high tech, low tech, no tech. So in your home, usually you're gonna have a lot more high tech options, right? Generators and things like that. You would have in your home, communication, different radios, your ham radio, things, whatever the case would be. And then you might have more low tech options and then no tech options. So I try to Obviously, if I can have high tech, I want high tech over low tech. And if I can have low tech over no tech, I want low tech over no tech. But if I don't have high tech or low tech, it's nice to know some no tech stuff because it allows you still to have options to gain things like water, food, shelter, medical, supplies, medical ability to treat yourself medically, and other things like that, security, protection, so on and so forth. So just think in terms of that. But we'll get into that in more detail in the future. But that's kind of where we're going to start from. Get this foundation, get something started. Convince yourself that you can't come up with a good reason because you can't. Why being prepared is a bad idea. Write in and please, if you have a reason why being prepared is a bad idea, please write in and tell us because we're curious to hear what you have to say why being prepared is a bad idea. Okay?
Yeah,
I didn't say being paranoid where you don't enjoy life, don't enjoy your family, don't enjoy living. I didn't say that, but be prepared.
Yeah, be realistic.
Waste lots of money on nonsense that they don't have to waste it on. When you could, by having this, it's no different than insurance policy or something like that. When you need it, you're glad you have it. So we'll start there with this preparedness thing, and then we can go into some specific things. Maybe sometimes we can do actual live session, or a video of doing something, or some firearms, or some survival skills, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, we don't. Of course, you have the RMA camps and etc. And you cover so much there. I think it would be interesting if it maybe like whenever we get together, we record some stuff and to add to the preparedness, to not go too far. Just think about what's happening in Europe with the energy crisis right there. Right. Like, or you go to California and all these people buying electric cars, and then you have that crazy governor saying that people cannot, please do not charge your vehicles.
Right.
Or I forgot which state that people sign up for that savings through the energy company, and they had the smart thermostats. I'm just giving like a low issue. And then all of a sudden they tried to crank up their ACs, and the ACs wouldn't do it because the energy company was controlling the thermostat. And then we had the pandemic, and now we have a serious issue with the supply of many commodities and food because the Ukraine war, because of so many different reasons. So truth is that we're never too far from a real crisis. And we saw that with the way that they handled the pandemic, not the pandemic itself, because now we know that even though it was very serious, the problem is maybe we get some political in the future, but the problem were the policies pretty much, I think, in my opinion. But anyway, it could be us here living in the United States, depending where you live. It could be a tornado, hurricane. It could be a flood. It could be many different things. In Brazil, or earthquake. In Brazil, we don't have that many issues, but say, I've seen in my hometown devastation through crazy thunderstorms and huge cases of people losing their houses and etc. So you never know. I think this is something that I need to develop more. I've been creating some things here in the house. I live in a condo, so I'm very limited. But we do have some plans. And this is something that we're definitely going to develop in the future episodes. This episode is almost like going a little too far, but this is the first one. So this is going to be a 90-minute episode. And then the next ones, we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter, but there's so much to talk about. And I love when Shihan Walt brought the idea of having the Preparedness Principles segment, the Reality War principle as well, because you guys see, like you said, being a martial artist is a lifelong lifestyle, let's say. Being martial means so much more than just practicing moves or going to competition. It's up to you if you want to just be a hobbyist, if you just want a sports person, competitor, or get rich fighting in UFC, if you make to the, high ranks. But if you want to be complete, it's very important to understand how to minimize the distractions. Like we talk about reality on the Reality Warrior principles, some things that can become distractions, preparedness, and we can talk about learning basic CPR, stop the bleed, a TECC, a technical emergency casualty care, going through courses, because in a moment of crisis, all those things becomes, in my opinion, things that are going to take your focus away, right? Going to be distractions. And that can, a small lack of awareness because you don't understand some things now can hurt your self-protection. It can hurt your security, like you said. So I think all those things are great. So I got to put here in the descriptions my email or your email so people can send comments. Please, again, podcast takes a while to have like this really strong visibility. So the more you share with your friends, you hit the like button, send your comments and interact with us, the best. That would be the better, because we really want to help people. We want to like inspire people. We want to hear from different people. We want to also grow. I'm doing this also for my own selfish reasons, because I like to talk to Shihan. I learn a lot. So it's my way to spend more time and have more connection. But also we're going to bring different people, and I think this is going to be awesome. So we're going to stop the podcast. I'm going to say bye to everybody. Say bye. And then we stay just 5 more minutes, and we go from there. So anyway, thank you very much for watching or listening to the Core Combatives Podcast, an RMA experience. And, RMA stands for Reality Martial Arts, a system co-founded by Shihan Walt Lysak, my teacher. And thank you for watching us or listening to us.
God bless, I guess.
God bless, guys.